Hello everyone, I'm Ian Wishart. Thanks for joining us here on the Take A Pew Podcast. Alongside me, of course, is the natural phenomenon that we call Mr. Simon Clark.
Hi guys.
Wow, what was that?
Well, it's what all the podcasters and YouTubers say, isn't it? Hi guys.
Well, perhaps, but I think you have to be under 50 to get away with that, mate.
Oh, sorry, mate. Hello, everybody.
That's better. Now, dear listener, for this episode, we have hauled our Take A Pew down the M3 to visit the lovely Hampshire town of Romsey.
Yes, and excitingly, just a stone's throw away from the amazing Peppa Pig world.
Indeed. But I think you also need to be under 50 to do that, unless you've got children in tow.
Well, you know me, always a child at heart.
I think that's just your sense of humour, mate. But anyway, we've come to Romsey to meet the senior leader of Freedom Church.
What? Not the Sim Dendy?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Sim's also a leadership coach, an author and a podcaster.
Well, I bet he says, hi guys.
Perhaps. But on with the show. This is the Take A Pew Podcast with Sim Dendy.
The Sim Dendy.
And here we are at Freedom Church in Romsey. In fact, in a rather professional-looking studio within the church building. And we're joined by, yes, you've guessed it, Sim Dendy. Sim, welcome to the show. And please, take a pew.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Hello, Sim. Thanks for having us. Perhaps you could introduce yourself to our lovely listeners.
Absolutely, yes. So my name is Sim Dendy, the Sim Dendy, I think, as you would say. I am 48 years old as of just 2 weeks ago, and I'm married to my wife, the lovely Lottie, over 25 years now, and I have 4 children, although I often say they're 2 fellas and a couple of teenagers because they're a bit grown up now. Now, I've been involved in church leadership in one form or another since 1992 when I left school 30 years ago. But I am currently the senior leader at Freedom Church here in the beautiful town of Romsey, known for Peppa Pig World. Thank you for that. That's our highlight.
Highlight of the day. Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks, Sim. As ever, we're going to be getting to know you through the slightly strange lens of Take A Pew, how you got to where you are today, a little about life in Romsey, your favourite things, and your perfect picnic.
Oh, yes. As well as getting your spiritual pearl of wisdom and your answer to one of Simon's random questions. But let's start way back at the beginning. Where did life's journey start for you? I understand it was within 3,000 miles of Azerbaijan.
It was indeed within 3,000 miles, yes.
No, my information is correct.
Yeah, well done, Ian. That's good.
So yes, where was I from? So I was brought up in Ely in Cambridgeshire, and my dad was a church pastor of the local church. And then at the age of 11, we moved to Maidstone in Kent, where my dad took on another church, middle of a housing estate. And that's where really I kind of formed my Christian faith and my love for the church in that opportunity. And literally I left school from 18 and went to work for an organisation called Children Worldwide, becoming a children's minister and travelling the UK before coming to work for a local church as a schools worker. So that's how life began for me.
So straight in. So we have a couple of questions before we race on forward from that. And our first question is around your education. And that question is...
What were you like at school? Were you a little bit geeky? Or were you a little bit freaky? Or were you a little bit cheeky? What were you like at school?
Yes, Sim, what were you like at school?
Wow, no one's asked me that question for a long time. I was one of the sporty types, I suppose. I was one of those. I had my half colours, my full colours. I was in the rugby team, and that was a real important part of what I did, I suppose. What was I like at school? That's a great question. I enjoyed school. I went to an all-boys school, so maybe that explains a few things. So in Kent, it was a grammar school system, so 13 plus, off you go. And the sixth form, we carried on with that. But yeah, I loved my experience at school, and rugby was a big part of it. I went to a tour of Canada with my school rugby team, and I was a big kid. So I was this height when I was like 13, 14. And I stopped at that point. I never made 6 foot, but I was really close to it. I used to lie and pretend I really was. But I was one of the biggest kids in the year in those early years, which meant someone passed you the rugby ball and you just kind of run through. And then as everyone else gets a bit bigger and a bit older, you can't quite do it in the same way you used to be able to do it.
I remember, in the early days, rugby was basically British bulldog in the playground, wasn't it? With a ball. That's all it was. Just
With a bull, did you say?
with
Oh,
a
with
ball.
a ball.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, a ball. We did. There was a comprehensive down the road. They used to use
They
a
used to-
bull. Yeah, which was a completely different kettle of fish.
What about lessons, Sim? Did you sort of like any particular maths or physics or anything?
I was in those weird early days of computer studies.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So, with a green screen monitor and a floppy disk that wasn't actually floppy, which is still, I love the fact that the save icon on your computers is still that blue square that most children have no idea what on earth that thing is. But I did that. I did an A-levels, computer studies, I did electronics, and I was one of sort of those geeky type of things. And my claim to fame is I got the third highest score in the whole year at A-levels in computer studies. I got what's called an N at A-level.
Wow.
It's a little known secret. I kind of got a near miss. Yes, someone came top of the class with an A, someone got a C, and I got an N for a near miss. But we loved those 2 years of just playing around with computers, and in that world where there was no Google, there was no Windows, before a mouse, it was all like typing on a keyboard and code and all those kind of things. So I think I've lost a bit of that geekiness, but it can still be resurrected every now and then. Don't worry.
Well behaved, didn't get in any trouble, or
I would always push the boundary. Should we say that? I would always push the boundary. That's not really changed. Just because the rules said something, well, let's just see what happens if we push that a little bit further, which works well in sport, doesn't always work well in the classroom.
Nice. And then outside school, you're quite a large family, I think. Isn't it?
Yeah, I'm one of 6 children,
Wow.
so number 3 in the list. 5 boys and 1 sister, my sister Liz, and she gets a lot of sympathy. But let me tell you, she can handle her own. So,
Sure.
So don't worry, she did okay. But outside of school, family was really important. Really enjoyed being part of a large family. On the whole, my parents were always amazing at inviting others back into the home, so we always had extras. Which always a bit of a mixed blessing. So a large family, you're always a little bit eking out the portions, and then your parents invite the random stranger who turned up to church that Sunday, and there's something in you that goes, really, that means less for the rest of us. And you watch my mum pile up their plate, and you're looking, going, seriously, it's not going to go very far today. That spaghetti bolognese will be a couple of strands of spaghetti each by the time it gets to my plate.
So you have to learn to be gracious and generous. I'm sure.
Absolutely. Still learning that one. Ian, still learning.
me too.
And is it so with Dad being a pastor? Did life revolve around the church of the family life, or?
Yeah, I think more probably my reflection would be that that's what he did. He went out and did church things
Right.
and came back, and it wasn't really a family involvement apart from attendance on a Sunday. Very much it was throughout the week my dad would go and do church things, and if I'm honest, it was the last thing I ever wanted to do. I watched my dad do what he did, and we went through a pretty nasty sort of church split where there's some disagreement with the church when I was probably about 15, and I just remember thinking, who in their right mind would lead a church? What a ridiculous job where people have opinions of what you should or shouldn't do all the time. And I just thought that is a fool. I love the church. I still love the church. I think it's brilliant. That's why I wrote a book about the church. But I just think that the way we treat our leaders is sometimes horrendous. And I've met too many people who have been too damaged by the church. And so I just saw that as a young man and went, I don't ever want to do. That's a ridiculous job. I'm happy to work for the church. I'm happy to support the church, attend the church, but I never want to lead it because that's a mug's game right there.
Well, I guess we'll find out how that impression changed, as evidently it did. But just before we move on, we've got another question for you to look over all of that early life, and this question is:
What's your fondest childhood memory? What's your fondest of all your childhood memories? What's your fondest?
Oh, yes, yes. What's your fondest childhood memory?
Oh, I've got loads, but probably my fondest one, because it puts me in good light, is when I was probably at 4 years old. My parents moved house. We moved house into the country. We were living in Cambridgeshire, and they moved from the town of Littleport to a house in the middle of nowhere, really, called 10 Mile Bank on the River Ouse. And my parents were so busy packing up the house, they left me and my brothers behind. And it was a classic. The parents thought that we had gone with someone else, and someone else thought that we'd gone with my parents, and none of us had gone. And instead, me and my 2 older brothers were left abandoned. We came back to the house. We'd been out playing, came back, and the house was empty, and everyone was gone. And we're like, what do we do? And I went, I know the way to the new house. I'll walk us there. It was 3 miles away. And I was 4 years old, and I walked, my two brothers and I remembered the way because I'd been with my parents on a couple of occasions. And I took them all the way down and I turned up, my 2 brothers in tow. My parents were like, where have you been? We just walked from there. They said, but it's miles away. We're like, yeah, we just walked there. And that's one of my sort of fondest memories because it makes me look good.
Oh, absolutely.
And even to this point, my 2 oldest brothers, Mark and John, are adamant that isn't the true story. I don't really care because I think truth spoils a good story.
Yeah.
And so I'm sticking to that as one of my early memories of being a very knowledgeable map reader at such a young age.
It's very good, very impressive. And it really is early, isn't it?
It really was early.
Yeah.
Yes, that's good memory.
That's
that one.
fantastic.
Excellent. Okay, so we move on to sort of adult maturity, if you like, and pick up the story from when you left school, adamant not to get involved in any sort of church leadership thing. How did that pan out?
Yeah, well, I'd always been involved with children's work. I'd worked at Spring Harvest back in the day before DBS checks and things. You could work as a teenager, and I think I was probably 13 or 14. I was working with Ishmael in the Glory Company, looking after back then it was like 1,000 8 to 11-year-olds, and they would take anyone to help you, sort of thing. And I loved working with children, doing children's programs, summer camps, school activities, assemblies. Play schemes in the holiday times and stuff, holiday clubs we used to call them. And so I left school at 18. I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't go to university, which like 99% of my friends all went to university. There was a grammar school, is what you did. And I was in the absolute minority. I think it's me and one other person that really was never going to go to university that didn't go. And so I actually went and worked for Children Worldwide, led by a guy called David Iliff in West Sussex, who started a place called Dalesdown, which was a centre for children and families. And I travelled the UK and did holiday clubs and play schemes and summer camps and school assemblies, and just travelled and experienced just serving. So that was my sort of access point, and at the age of 18 I started working in that way. I then was taken on by, ironically, the church that let my dad go. That was an interesting and a whole other story, where there'd been a split, but I'd stayed around. My friends were there, so I stayed in place. And they approached me and said, would you take on our children's work? And would you do schools ministry on our local housing estate? It was a really tough housing estate called Shepway, on the edge of Maidstone. And I worked there, and I became really well known in the local schools. I was in a school every day, doing after-school football clubs, doing assemblies and classroom activities. And that really sort of progressed from there, really. I was at Spring Harvest doing children's work, met my wife, Lottie. She was running the 8 to 11s. I was running 5 to 7 whiz kids at that point.
I remember whiz kids.
Yes,
Wow,
and she was working with her brother, Rich Hubbard, who was running the PowerPoint 8 to 11s. And we met in the team lounge at Spring Harvest in Skegness in 1993.
Nice.
And doing children's work. In
How
different
romantic.
age. How romantic, Skegness. And
You remember the weather at the time?
The weather, well, it was always miserable. Absolutely, that never really changed. But that was probably, I suppose. And then I, doing children's work, I moved to get married to Lottie to Little Hampton in West Sussex, where she was based. It was a much bigger church, a lot more young people our age. It was the church where we had Delirious and Cutting Edge, and so the youth movement was really exciting. And so it was good in my early 20s to move there and be part of this exciting church. And then the Aaron Church said, would you join the team and help develop our community program and come and join the leadership team? And that was the point really where I stepped into that. In the middle of that, I guess the bit that really maybe flipped the switch for me, where I went from serving the church to actually thinking maybe I could lead the church, was we had a guy came to town, an American prophet, who actually called me out from the crowd of people and just said, I believe that God's calling you to lead the church. And I remember that time, and I was quite emotional because I'm like going, I don't want to do that. I was like having this internal fight with God, and he was saying, I really believe that that's what God's called you to do. He's called you to come and lead his people, and in your youth to lead a substantial church. And I remember just being impacted by that, and there was something about what he was saying that resonated with me. Dale Gentry was his name. Dale Gentry was a well-known prophet at the time. And there was something in me that was pushing back and saying, I'm not interested. And so over that next sort of season, I just had to process that and get to grips with the fact, yes, this was a calling on my life that I need to respond to. And it was God who was calling me. And so from that point on, I started looking for opportunities to serve and to lead. And anything I could do to help lead the church, I would just put my hand up and say, I'll do that. So I led the youth work, I led children's ministry, I led community projects. We helped build a community centre and got involved with events like Spring Harvest, even leading the event and other events as well. And so just just looking for opportunities to serve and to lead as God put in front of my path, really.
Well done for being
fantastic.
obedient in that way.
I can make it sound easy in hindsight, but it was more of a grapple at the time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, with all the background that you mentioned, absolutely. And it's not uncommon, is it? For our guests realising there's a bit of a call somewhere, but kind of ignoring
resisting
it,
it, and then
sometimes for 20 years. And then,
Well, I think it's essential to have calling. If you're in church leadership without a calling, when the rubber hits the road, and this last couple of years has been as tough as, you will walk away and it will damage you, because ultimately you can't just do this as a career. It's not meant to be a career or a job or something you just get paid to. Really, this has got to be a spiritual calling you're responding to, because the moments where I have those tough, used to be phone calls, now it's, or letters, now it's emails on a Monday morning, they're the moments you have to grit your teeth and spend time with God and remind yourself, this is what God, you called me to do. And if you don't want me to do it anymore, it's fine. But all the time your calling still exists, I'm going to keep on doing what you've called me to do.
And you did some theological study at some point.
Yes, I did do some of that at some point. I mean, I did it throughout, and I was always someone who loved the Word of God and loved studying, and I often would be preaching and speaking, reading different books and so forth. But there is this thing that, when you go around and you don't have a dog collar on, you sometimes feel a little bit inferior. I'd go and visit people in a hospital or visit people in a prison, and those sort of organisations would say, "Oh, where's your dog collar?" Or which Anglican church are you part of? And you'd feel like, "Oh, I'm not the vicar," and that would be really confusing for people. And so I thought, well, if I get more qualifications, maybe that will help me. So I did do my master's in theology, and I jumped straight in there with Moreland's Bible College, and they were excellent. It took me 4 years to do what takes a year if you do it full time. But I did it alongside my other work at a church I was at the time called Central Hall in Southampton, a new community church. And so I naively thought that having education would make me more acceptable to that kind of, that I would have my identity as a church leader. It makes no difference whatsoever. I think people value who you are because of what you carry, which we'll talk about later on, rather than the letters after your name or education you have. But it was an important practice for me to do, the skill of learning to read different books, to read scripture, to articulate my thoughts, to argue a view. I think those were skills that were very helpful to me.
Did you enjoy the studying bit, and what was it like working with other people at the same time?
Yeah, I enjoyed the interaction with other students and meet, because it was mainly mature students on this MA course, so meeting other Baptist ministers, Methodist ministers, people from different backgrounds. That was fun. I didn't particularly enjoy the writing. I mean, it really made you write, like, you had to footnote everything and have to proof everything, and bibliography and all that kind of stuff. There's kind of the technical side of things, and often the comment I'd get from my tutors would be, it's a bit like a family service. When you write Sim, you make it so accessible to everybody that it's a little bit too generic. And I'm like, well, so you want me to write in a way that only academics can understand? And that is what they wanted, and I still push back against that, because I believe that the Jesus I follow told stories that everyday people could understand. I think with Spurgeon said you should always preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, and I think it's that kind of idea. You have the two side by side. You're connected to the real world, but you have some spiritual understanding as well. And you dovetail those two in, and one informs the other. As you get through life, you go, how does Scripture impact what I'm living and experiencing? And vice versa, you're reading Scripture going, how does this impact the way I live my life? And the two is, they call it, it's a pastoral cycle that you kind of connect those together. There you go, a bit of free theology for you.
A reference to Charles Spurgeon as well.
Charles the Sturgeon.
The Prince of Preachers.
Yes, no, we had an unfortunate incident with Charles the Sturgeon in an earlier show. But anyway, better not go there, because it went horribly wrong the last time. That's a really interesting point, Sim, I think. I say magnanimously. But the idea of, you think of the relative simplicity, but pithiness, and obviously of the way Jesus spoke, and you can get tied up in rather rarefied academic philosophical debate. It's interesting.
When I wrote the book, I called it simply Church, and it was designed to be a book that anyone could read, rather than trying to create a theological tome that a very few percentage of people would ever read.
Interesting. So where along the journey, I'm just trying to keep track of this journey now, where along the journey did you first lead a church, a group of people?
Fascinating. So I was working for Aaron Church. I was part of the leadership team there, but I wasn't the senior leader. I was very comfortable doing that. I was involved with the community work and developing community projects. We ran a couple of nurseries and a coffee shop and a community centre and loads of great projects in that area. And then a friend of mine called Billy Kennedy, who leads the Pioneer Network internationally, invited me to come and join him in Southampton in Central Hall, which is a big old Methodist church building.
Okay, yeah.
And he said, would you come and help me with this, developing some of our community work? And that was a multi-congregational model, so I had more than one sort of Sunday service. So we had the big one in the centre of the city, but then we had sort of various other church plants, sometimes in partnership with Methodist church locations, which was an interesting model. And so I ended up leading one of those congregations, and that's probably where I had a lot of my shaping as a leader. And being given the permission to make decisions and to oversee a community. And that was a lot of fun. I'd never been a city person, always lived in villages and smaller communities. So that was it's not a big city, Southern, but it was bigger than I'd ever experienced. And having to work with university students, which is an interesting kind of, community knowledge of themselves. They turn up at 18 with all the answers. That was fascinating, especially as you have two universities in the town. You have one which people in the church used to refer to as the university, and the other one. There was the ex-Polytechnic, Solent University, and the Southampton University that were deemed different types of universities. Yeah. Well, and trying to manage the students of both of those.
Having been to the university back in the day, it's entirely correct.
Yes. Yes, and I spent a lot of my time trying to stop people from saying such things and trying to value it. But which was very difficult. You had people who were doing sort of geography degrees and maths degrees, and people who were literally doing comedy degrees and trying to put those students together and make them play nicely. But that's why I learned a lot of my leadership experience was probably in that space. But it was only when I came to Romsey that I took on the senior leader role, which was fascinating, because suddenly you realise the responsibility of being the point person. It does change everything. I had the fun in Southampton of getting to play as if I was the senior leader without the ultimate responsibility. I had Billy Kennedy as my safety net. If it went wrong, I could point the finger and blame him. Here I have much more of that responsibility.
It is very different, I found in my work, that when you become where the buck stops, it's very different from where the buck nearly stops.
It's very true. Yes, I think the buck nearly stopping is much more fun. I think you can try things, and if it doesn't work, you shrug your shoulders. It's not your problem. If I make a mistake, I've got a trustee board who say, "Why do you do that for?" And so you're absolutely right. It is a different animal, but love being here. It's a beautiful town. We love Romsey. The family are very settled here, and so it's great. And it's been fun to do other events like Spring Harvest, where I've been able to stretch my leadership in national events and still have a local community. I still love the church. I want to keep a foot in the local church. I think church leaders get moved on and they start doing the sort of national charities or other things, other events, and they start forgetting why we did this in the first place. I think it's really important to stay grounded and be part of a church community.
And so tell us a little bit about your current church community. I mean, coming in here, we see you've got the food bank in the same space. You've got some Christians Against Poverty stuff going on. It sounds very active, is it?
Yeah, very active. Yes, I think so. We are very much involved with our community. So yes, you've mentioned that the food bank we've started, and the CAP debt services, and we do a life skills program, after school clubs, TLG working in schools, all that kind of things. We're a busy church that's really trying to get engaged in its community, partly because when I first arrived here, its engagement was very low, and that's always been my experience of churches, getting involved, get to know people. So we're very much connected into local council, the borough council, that I've been involved as a chaplain to the mayor and all these kind of things, and we're known in the town as people that bring good and make a difference, that we're here to bring change in a positive way. So it really is a really helpful sort of part of what we do. But we're also, we're a traditional church that we meet, well, we used to meet, didn't we, every Sunday in a building with worship and people preaching the word of God. So that would be something. But we haven't done that for 2 years now. Right. So presently we meet. Are you
still not in?
We are still not back in full. Right. So we are in multiple locations. So we are sitting in the middle of a studio that we beam our service from every Sunday. So every Sunday we have a worship band come in here. We preach. We do it all live from this venue. And that gets beamed out to multiple locations that then have a video screen and a local leader that then just takes people through a service experience. Oh, okay. So they can pause the worship, they can pray, they can lead people, and then they can minister to people afterwards. So it is a good model. And the school we meet in a local high school. They weren't comfortable with us coming back in. Their priority, understandably, was educating their children, not using their hall at the weekend for us. And that was back in the day of deep cleaning everything. And so if we'd have gone in on a Sunday, they had to clean it after we'd finished and stuff. And so we've had to sort of be a little bit nomadic in the last couple of years. But we are going back in the next short while, and we can't wait to see each other again.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's been quite a journey. I did read somewhere, it may be completely untrue. Don't worry.
Never let truth spoil a good story. I said that. Yeah, absolutely.
No, there was a mention of fire and rescue service at some point.
Yes, it's true. Wow,
Yeah.
good little bit of background
I think it's
research
LinkedIn
there.
or something
Yes.
that said that. But
Yes, I mean, at this point, people in my congregation roll their eyes because it's
Oh,
quite
really?
often that I use
Okay, moving on.
a story of... Yes, I was in West Sussex Fire and Rescue Service for 10 years. So when I worked for Arran Church in Littlehampton, I was also a retained firefighter. And before you ask, no, I didn't slide down any poles. It was more cats up trees and turning fire alarms off than anything else. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
That sounds very, very noble. And we always get a bit of a chuckle when we ask about what you do in your spare time.
Yes.
But what do you get up to relax?
Yeah. Well, spare time's been fun, isn't it? I mean, we quite enjoyed lockdown. My wife and I, we got our oldest two boys back for a year. My oldest son's just moved out and bought himself his own place. And so they had to stay home for a further year, and we just had great family time. And for me, what I love doing is eating with family and friends around a table, just taking time, the slow meal. That's some of the things I love to do. But I'm also active. I've joined our local veterans rugby team.
Oh, goodness.
So, yes.
That sounds dangerous.
It has been dangerous. A&E was my first visit after my very first match. It's no joking. I broke my nose in the very first game I played. But you know, I do enjoy the sport. My wife got fed up with me being at home, trying to do church from home on church on Zoom. And she goes, "You need to do something else. Get out of the house." So I joined a sailing club. And I always loved sailing and being in the water, so I started sailing, which sounds really posh, but it's more dinghies and kayaks than it is, people in special tweed outfits. So, love a bit of sailing,
fun.
love sport.
Have you got a little boat, or do you got one that you can use?
Yeah, so you basically have access to all the boats at the centre. So,
I see.
So on the River Itchen, you can just go down and whatever it takes your fancy, whether an electric motorboat or a sailing dinghy or a canoe, you just take them out and off you go, and it's great fun. So
River Itchen's lovely stretch of river.
it is a lovely stretch of
Beautiful.
river.
Done a bit of trout fishing or whatever on there.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you could do a bit of that. Yeah.
I've done some of that.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So that sounds all very active. And then I mentioned being a Hi Guys podcaster a little bit earlier. So how's that? It's the leadership project, is it?
It's called the Leadership Podcast.
Sorry,
with Sim Dendy. Yes, it's on all these platforms. I'm sure you know really well.
So how do you start that, Sim? Do you say hi guys? Or do
I
you
don't
say-
think anyone says hi guys in the podcast world that I move in. I know we just welcome people and say hello, and they tend to say hello back, and we just kind of go from there. But I've just been exploring. I love leadership. I love helping people develop in their leadership and train people in their leadership. It's a real honour. I think when people lead well, it really is empowering. And so I've just been interviewing people who lead well, typically in the Christian sphere, in church land. But so maybe some of the similar guests you've had, but it's been great, some of the conversations. And people are amazing, how they've adapted in this last season in their leadership, how they've come up with creative new ideas. I think actually the pandemic, although it's been horrendous in so many ways, I think has also brought some of the best out of the church. It's reinvented how do we do church in a changing culture, and watching and listening to some of the leaders and talk about how they do that. So I've enjoyed being in those conversations like we're doing now. I just enjoy having a chance to sit with people and talk like this. Yeah, I've enjoyed doing the podcast. It's definitely a great side hustle, I think people call it.
What's it like to have more than 10 listeners?
Do you know what? I don't even take much notice of the listening, because I actually quite enjoy the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think if I enjoy the conversation, and hopefully the guest enjoys the conversation, then people will find it and they'll come across it. And I'm not big on marketing, selling myself. It's just when I've been to events, they say, "Oh, can you wave your book in the air and tell everyone to buy it?" I'm like, "Well, I suppose so. If you want to." And there's a copy. It's a tenner at the back, and it feels awful.
Yeah, I'll sign it if you want.
Yeah, you just feel selling yourself, and same with podcasting. Yeah, you want people to listen, to make good use of the time you spent with someone like you guys have, spending your time today to come and see me. I hope lots of people listen to it for your sakes more than mine. But I think we've got to be careful, and I think with church leaders is really important, is we sometimes assume because you have more views, and that's been a thing in the last, you can see how many views you get or how many bums on seats you get on a Sunday, therefore you're a better leader or better speaker. And it's just not true.
I mean, because we know, despite our very small viewing numbers, this is the best podcast in the world.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, and-
in the world. Amazing.
and there are several
Yes.
podcasts, I think.
Not like this
Quantity
one.
over
Not like this
quality,
one.
or is it quality over
I
quantity?
don't know. Probably neither. It's a race to the bottom in our case, but there we go. But if you are listening, thank you very much for listening. That's absolutely wonderful.
You've just made them feel very special. You're an elite number.
But anyway, you've been working very hard, Sim, and I can see a rather marvellous picnic basket looming, which must mean it's time for many people's favourite part of the show, the little game we call My Favourite Things.
My favorite things.
Yes, Sim, we give you 5 categories and you just have to tell us your favourite thing in that category.
Okay.
Easy as pie. Ooh. And our first category, of course, is always your favourite book of the Bible.
The favourite book of the Bible. Well, that's a tough one because there's some 66 of them. They're all pretty good. But I will go for Philemon.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that is a first.
Philemon.
Yes, that's good. That's
First.
definitely a first.
It's the shortest, one of the shortest ones, which makes it good. I also think it's an incredible book that tells the story of the values of Jesus, about if you're a slave, you carry the same value to Jesus as if you are an employer, if you're the master. And the book of Philemon, there's more we could talk about, but the way he turns the whole thing around, I think is excellent. So yeah, Philemon
Brilliant.
would be my book of the Bible.
Great choice. And if you had to go Old Testament?
Look at Old Testament. Wow, I love the book of Judges because I love some of the stories.
Yeah, that's great.
For me, the story of Samson and his fresh jawbone of a donkey. I mean, I always ask the question, how fresh was that jawbone? Because I think there was a donkey just sitting there, and Samson wandered by and rips that jawbone out. I hope this isn't a PG rated.
Pretty gruesome.
But I know.
Yeah.
Deborah and the tent pegs through the temple. I mean, come on. These are the ones we don't talk about in Sunday school.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, brilliant. So as we record this episode, Sim, the Winter Olympics are on. So with that in mind, we'd like to know your favourite flower.
Okay, I thought you could say sport, and I was going to say curling. I'm loving the curling. Favourite flower? Wow. I'm not really into flowers. I buy
not
flowers
into
for my
flowers?
wife.
No,
I do
Good
that.
answer, good.
And it's the right thing to do. And she loves wildflowers, so I'll just go with. Well, my wife loves flowers, so I'll go for the wildflowers, the big daisies, all that kind of stuff. The wilder, the better, rather than sort of things that look too polite and too ordered.
Good, that's fair enough. And your favourite winter sport then? That would be curling.
Well, no, I just come back from a skiing trip. I love skiing. I'm not very good at it, but I just love the kind of the freedom of it, the getting away from everything else. It's complete fun. I wish I could be better at it. One day maybe. But yeah, I have watched the curling and I find it amazing.
Yeah,
the kids going, Dad, this is
compelling,
so boring. I'm like, yeah, but it's the only thing we're a little bit good at.
Yeah.
So I'm going to watch it because GB might actually make something of this. We're rubbish at everything else.
Quite a strange thing. I remember we went on, when I was about 10 or 11 or so, we went on holiday. My family's Scottish. We went on holiday to Aviemore and they had a curling rink there. It was an ice rink, but it had the curling. And I used to play human curling with myself because I was a lonely child. And I'd skate along and then I'd have to push and try and judge. I wasn't allowed to change my glide, just try and glide into the target, really.
Oh, so would you jump on the ice then and just
No,
carry on?
slide along on my
I've
stomach.
never heard of human curling.
No,
This is a
I've
new
made
sport.
it up, I think. Very good. Wildflowers, I think that was the answer.
Wildflowers is the
Very
answer.
good. Our third category is, it's always been a top 5, and for this season it's always going to be top 5 films. Your top 5 films.
Now, you asked me this question in advance. This is a tough one.
Yes.
Because for me, I love films, not so much for the film itself, but for what it reminds me of.
Excellent.
It's the time of it. So for me, one of my top films would be up there, would be... so in lockdown, my son and I watched all the Marvel films.
Okay.
Oh, we did
watched
as
the
well.
whole
Yeah,
thing,
brilliant.
like 27 films or something.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
watched all the Marvel films. That doesn't really help you because it's not top 5, but they were definitely in there. And Iron Man 2 would definitely be in one of my top films, I've got to say.
Okay.
But other films for me would be like the original Point Break, phenomenal film.
That's very
would be
much
up
of an
there.
era, that.
Definitely of an
Yeah,
era.
yeah.
The bad boys make good. That moment where they're going to jump out of the plane. Is this going to work, this parachute, or has it been damaged in some way? Beautiful moment. Probably another film me would be Gladiator.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Are you not entertained? I think is every church leader's comment they want to make but never make. When he gets frustrated with the crowd because they're not getting what they want. I think that's a phenomenal film. And on such a great to watch on a big screen. It's just amazing. It makes me want to go home and watch it again. Gladiator would be up there, and probably for me as well, which I've loved this film, a series of films, would be Rocky. So the Rocky films, I've got the picture on my wall of my office at home. But I think the Rocky films, when I was growing up, one of the first things I went to cinema was Rocky 3. With Rocky and Mr. T,
Mr.
which
T.
confused me because he was in the A team and I didn't understand it all. A couple of years ago, I took my son to go watch Creed, and I had to show him Rocky 4 before I went to the cinema. So you've got to understand the story behind this, and he really appreciated that. So the whole kind of the movie I love that kind of movies to go through. So there's a lot of films there I've said. Hope that's helpful.
That's great. Yeah, they're all quite dynamic, aren't they?
Yeah, because I think films are about escapism.
You haven't got any rom-coms in there?
No, don't be so silly. I watch them, but I
Mary Poppins?
No, I've done Sliding Doors with my wife, and it's just like, seriously, I'm still confused over who's who. Until she cuts her hair, I didn't know what was going on. But no, for me, I think films should be silly and escapism. Adam Sandler or something. They should be ridiculous, so you forget for an hour and a half what life is about. I think when I watch films that are a bit depressing because they're so close to reality, I'm like, well, I could just live my life rather than watch that. So I get that there's time for it, but I love the kind of the hero films and stuff.
That's great. I think actually that collection of films really gives a real insight into
doesn't it? Yeah.
It's worrying.
Gives a great picture, I think. Well done. Very good.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. Right, next one for you, Sim. Your favourite holiday accommodation?
Oh, wow. Well, here's the thing for me. A holiday accommodation has to be better than what you live in every day of the week. That's my big bugbear. In early days of holidays, we would go for cheap holidays. I mean, not being rude, that's what we could afford. I got called into the ministry, kind of get sucked in by its financial kind of benefits. And we would go on these cheap, terrible camping holidays, or we'd stay in these Euro camp things. And about day 2, I'd be like, my bed at home is more comfortable.
What is the point?
My TV is bigger. My sofa is more. And I just think, why are we here for? So I think my rule of thumb is you have to go somewhere on holiday. It's actually a nicer experience or a nicer location than where you live in. Because I live in a nice place. I live in a nice house. I would rather almost enjoy my own holiday, but that's just me. But for me, if I can get away somewhere there's water, so a log cabin overlooking a water is a dream holiday with a boat moored up outside.
Perfect.
That would be sweet.
Lovely.
Sweet.
That's a great choice. I like that. Yeah. Okay, so our last category, it's always multiple choice, and I'll give you 3 possible answers. So, Sim, we'd like to know your favourite Sim.
Hey, nice one.
So the possible answers are the heart of all mobile communication, the Sim card, the heart of all advanced mathematics, the simultaneous equation,
like it,
or the heart of all Easter celebrations, the Sim nil cake.
Oh, that's tenuous.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sim.
It was just like
So the Sim card, simultaneous equation, or Sim nil cake.
Amazing. I never wanted to be called Simeon growing up, but one of my best friends started to call me Sim, and it stuck. It just stuck like names do. I wanted to be called Steve when I was a kid because that was cool. Thought I'd be Steve. But I became known as Sim, and it's kind of stuck, and I'm only called Sim when I'm in trouble by my mum, sort of thing. But my favourite moment, and I'll throw another one in for you, is I went and did some work in Portugal, in North Portugal, in an orphanage, and the children over there thought it was amazing that my name in Portuguese is Yes.
Oh, nice.
So Sim, the M is not pronounced, but it's spelled S-I-M, and they love the fact that Sim is actually yes in Portuguese. So I'm going to throw back an alternative, and I like the idea that my name in Portuguese means yes.
Okay. So your favourite Sim is Yes.
Here we go.
That's
We
nice.
like that. We like
You're
that.
going all cultural.
I should actually have really included in that list the best-selling book, Simply Church.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
People have said, can you do a series of that? Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Very good. Well, that's possibly the best set of answers we've had on the show. I think it's definitely in the top 16, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it must be. Yeah.
And that means you've earned a little pastoral breather, Sim, as we ask you...
What would you pick in your perfect picnic if the picking were up to you? Would you be sticking in some finger-licking chicken, or would you be silly and pick a lily? 10 us, what would you choose?
Yum, yum.
Yes, Sim, what would you pick for your perfect picnic? But just before we lay out the blanket and unpack the hamper, Sim, where would you go to have your perfect picnic?
Oh, fantastic. I'm loving the fact that you guys enjoy your jingles more than probably your listeners do. It's amazing. I wish people could see what I can see. It's grown men just singing along to a jingle. Where would I go for my perfect picnic? I think for me, it's got to be right in the middle of nature. My big thing is we live near the New Forest. If I can get away from anything man-made, that's just the most beautiful space. If I could just go away from any kind of roadway or road noise or planes over, and I can get into the New Forest, I think to get somewhere that's green and somewhere that's just like calm, wildflowers, obviously for my wife's sake, and throw out the picnic blanket. That's a great idea.
Oh, fantastic.
New Forest would be good.
Nice, perfect, and handy.
Yeah.
So there we are. We're sitting around, surrounded by flowers. Beautiful part of the world. Lovely blanket there, and we've got a lovely hamper. We open up the hamper. What do we find in your perfect picnic?
Yeah, well, I've got to be careful not to get into my soapbox here, but
Right.
I've changed my diet in the last few months. I have Crohn's disease, and so it's something I have to manage, and so I've had to change my feeding habits, which has mean things like I've had to say no to a lot of things. So bread's completely off; that's just not happening anymore. But so when it comes to picnics, and I found this really
difficult then,
frustrating.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's tough.
Pre-packaged anything is just a no-no. So I'm back to what they call the caveman diet. It's the paleo autoimmune diet, where you basically eat things that are freshly made, and it's stuff that's the sort of thing your gran would have eaten is good for you. But I would go for lots of meats. So I think a meat feast of a hamper would be great. I think you said chicken in your jingle. Chicken would be in there.
Finger-licking
Ham
chicken.
would be in there, absolutely. Those sort of big lumps of meats would be probably where I'd be. But then things like I love, sort of things like my kids laugh, but I'll eat celery all day long with a big stash of peanut butter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of goes on in there.
Together.
Absolutely.
dip it in. Yeah,
You've got to
that's
dip
great,
it. Where have
yeah.
you been?
Well, I don't. There are very few things I don't like, and for somehow I don't like celery. And I can't work out how anyone can possibly not like celery. It doesn't taste of anything. But I
Well,
don't
because
like
when you dip it in peanut butter, it tastes of peanut butter.
Maybe I'll try it.
It's like a disposable spoon. You've got to see it that way.
Okay.
The celery's just there to scoop it from tub to mouth. What my children don't know is that I actually quite happily double dip into the family peanut butter. In fact, not double dip, but that would be a lie. Triple, quadruple dip. I will eat and I will dip, and I'll be really happy about it. And they, if they listen to this podcast, will find out it's full of Dad's germs.
Always with celery? Or
Always with
nice.
celery. Every now and then, the little finger around the kind of inside of the jar.
Oh, the inside bit of the jar,
Yeah,
yeah.
because how else do you get it?
And they've been wondering how COVID ripped through the family so quickly, haven't they?
Absolutely. It's my fault.
Nice.
Yes, so food's an important part of, but what I eat, and I've become a little bit those ingredient readers. The people in the supermarket that take forever. That's me now. I've turned into that really annoying person that looks at the back label and says, I'm not buying that with 15 different E numbers. That's me, I'm afraid.
So what would you have to drink with that, Sim? Would you have a nice herbal tea or something? Or
No, herbal teas are good for you, but they smell nice and taste horrible, let's be honest. They're always a bit disappointing in their outcomes. So I've discovered, I love my coffee. I'm a big coffee snob. Oat milk and coffee is a winner for me. So that's a good thing. I'll go for coffee every time. But actually, I'm really happy with a glass of water. I think water is the most underrated. And
Fantastic
it's a great drink and it's free. Why would you want to fill yourself with sugar when you could just have a nice glass of water?
Yeah, it's herbal. The problem I've had with herbal tea is that it's not tea.
no.
I know it's slightly pedantic. I mean, an infusion, fine, but yeah. So that's very. So do you find with Crohn's then, Sim? Is that how much of an impediment is that?
Well, I've had it for some 19 years now, and then true story. I think all my stories are true, so I don't know why I even said that. But it's fascinating, isn't it? To be honest, what's that
it's good
phrase
to just
about?
clarify.
I got Crohn's when my youngest boy was just after he was born, and spent a couple of years struggling with health. For a start, couldn't work out what it was, and I was really unwell. I lost like 3 stone, and it was really quite grim at the time. But then through prayer, I believe I encountered a miracle, and it went. I had no Crohn's at all, no illness, no pain. I went to my consultant in Chichester Hospital, and I said, I believe I've been healed. He said, well, we can prove that if you want me to by having a colonoscopy. And I said, I'm happy just to be confident that it is healed. And he said, that's fine. So I came off his list, and for 15 years I had nothing. I never even gave it a moment's thought. I had no pain. I ate what I wanted. I didn't care 2 hoots. Then sadly, a couple of years ago, the pain came back, and it was my wife went, "Oh, I think this is your Crohn's disease." And I got retested on Christmas Eve, 2019. And they confirmed the Crohn's was back. The last 2 years, it's really affected me physically. It has been pretty tough, if I'm honest. I watched a BBC documentary by one of the Strictly dancers called Amy, who told her story of Crohn's, and I was in tears. I mean, just hearing her story, how she grappled with it, and I was like, I've had to do some of those things as well, and just kind of, sometimes you have these nights where you're up all night, and then you have to kind of get on with your day. You can't just sort of lie in bed and feel sorry for yourself. And I even talk about this. I hate talking about it. I don't really want to be any sort of spokesperson for these sort of things. But the truth is, there are many people with hidden illnesses who are struggling with it all the time. And because we don't talk about it, because it's a bit private and a bit awkward to talk about, which means I don't even tell my family when I'm ill. And the next morning they're like, "Dad, were you up in the night?" And I'll be like, "Well, I'm all right now," because I don't want to make it into a thing.
Okay, well, that sounds like a great picnic hamper, whatever we had in there. I forgot, lots of meat.
Lots of
wasn't it?
stuff. Quite a lot of meat and celery.
Some nice
peanut butter.
Not herbal infusion. So, but it was very good. So, we hope you get to enjoy such a picnic before too long, Sim. But in the meantime, back to the Dendy journey.
Oh, yes.
Now, we've looked backwards and sideways, if you like, but let's look forward.
Yes, Sim, what would you like us to be talking about if we were doing this show 12 years from now?
Wow, 12 years from now. In 12 years, I'll just celebrate my 60th birthday.
Gosh.
So in 12 years' time, and I hope life looks different. I hope the world looks different by then. That's for certain. It feels like a very confusing place at the moment. We have a very polarised society, and I hope we can find some things we can actually agree on as a nation and as a culture. In 12 years' time, what will I be doing in 12 years' time? Well, I'm hoping I'm travelling once again. I love travelling. And I'm really looking forward. And I just had a brief experience last week. I went away and we travelled together to do some speaking at a leaders' conference with my wife. And normally we spent years having children, or she's had children and having to stay at home and looking after children. I'm hoping in years to come I'll be able to travel more with my wife Lottie. That's the best experience. Be able to see the world, be able to meet other people. I think people are fascinating. I think people are amazing. And when you travel, you get to see people in different cultures. I did enjoy the writing. I'd like to do some more writing. That will definitely come out to play.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Still leading a church of some kind?
Yeah, well, I still want to be involved in the church. I guess my concern is, as a leader who then will be in their 60s, going, I don't want to be blocking young people stepping through. And it's not that you can't lead when you're in an older demographic. I think I think life's about seasons. Don't get me on this one, but I've got no time in some ways for the hand battoning, passing on from generation to generation. I think we all play our part. I think the image of a baton being passed to the younger generation means you have to let go of the baton. And it means it's your turn and my hands are off, and they're having their turn. I can't have a go just yet. I think actually no, we need every generation to be involved. And I've got a load of people in my church who are technically they're retired, but they've got so much energy. I mean, they're getting retired now, younger and younger, late 50s. They're getting retired, and they're saying, "Can I volunteer? Can I help?" People befriending for our CAP program, serving in the food bank, helping doing DIY around this centre here, because they've got time and they've got energy and they love Jesus, want to serve him faithfully, and they're not done yet. They've got loads more to offer, and I'm hoping I'll be the same sort of character that goes, I'm not done just because I've got a bit older.
Yeah, we're not quite done yet, are we?
No, not
exactly.
Not quite.
Not quite.
Well, we wish you every blessing wherever life takes you, Sim. And with that, we climb towards the summit of the show, taking us to new heights of intellectualism and spirituality.
Yes, and the base camp for our final assault is where we indulge in some pretty serious research into the Bible. And we call this part of the show...
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Yes, Sim, is it true? Now, regular listeners will know that we have already been able to shine a fresh light on some very important issues. And here's another one that we need your help with. And on this occasion, we turn to the Old Testament, and specifically the book of Daniel, because it seems that there is lots of circumstantial evidence that Daniel, when taken into exile in Babylon, was actually part of a touring variety show. And 3 other members of the troupe were Gladrag, Mishael and Abendibus. First, we see that these 3 were clearly an escapology seemingly surviving being put in a furnace and being helped, it appears, by a glamorous assistant, probably Debbie McGhee. And then a little later, we find Daniel himself showing off his lion taming skills, which were, of course, such a popular part of the variety show. So, Sim.
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Wow. Well, I'm hoping your listeners understand that that's probably not in the Bible, but some of them are probably scratching their heads and reaching for the Bible to go, maybe
It's
was
a very
Debbie
strange book,
McGhee
though,
that
Daniel.
old? She still looks great. What's going on there? But yes, no, I don't think that's exactly how I remember the Bible.
okay,
But probably
okay.
if you read the second half of Daniel, because most people stop at Daniel 6, Daniel 7, because
Right.
it all gets a bit complicated. The second half of Daniel sounds actually a little bit more complex and a bit more random than what you've just described. But yes, I'm afraid that's not true.
Do you
not
think it's
true.
not?
It's probably not true, but it sounds amazing.
I think it's a lot, because Nebuchadnezzar, who was the first king, does sound a lot like abracadabra, doesn't it? I think. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a whole magical variety thing going on there. You don't think that's right? No.
I don't think it's right. I think you got the names wrong. It was actually Daniel and your shack, my shack, and a bungalow.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
yes.
Okay. I think, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Oh, well, anyway, Case, we think that's probably not true. I was quite excited by that one.
Well written, though. Well written.
I think...
Research not so
There was
well.
a lot
but
in there.
I well, there probably are people that it's the sort of thing that people would put forward. I mean, normally these things are
Yeah.
completely
They're ridiculous,
that
Yeah.
we have. But actually, I'm sure there are people that, not necessarily Debbie McGhee, but that probably think, yeah, but it was some illusion trick thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, but with that, Sim, perhaps you would bless us with your spiritual pearl of wisdom.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Well, first of all, I need to say I feel like I'm on a Harry Hill TV burp show with those jingles. It's amazing. My pearl of wisdom, following that, my pearl of wisdom would be this, is that I'm convinced more than ever before that what you carry is more important than what you say. That the person you are is more important than the person you pretend to be. And the truth always leaks out, whether we want to think that or not. You know, we're living in this pandemic and people catch what you carry. They don't catch what you tell them is true. And so I think as Christians, as followers of Jesus, and as a church leader and as a follower of Jesus myself, I want to be somebody that makes sure that what I'm carrying is authentic. And it's very easy as someone who speaks for a living just to say the right things. And that's okay for a season, but people catch what you're carrying. And that's a real challenge, because am I carrying something which is truly of God, which is truly kind and loving and caring for people, or am I just saying the right words and hoping people won't see behind the facade? So that's my pearl of wisdom for you today. You are what you carry, not just what you say.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sim. Excellent. But before we are lulled into a false sense of normality, it is sadly time for Simon to derail us into the weird and wonderful world of...
Simon's random question.
Simon, what is your random question for Sim?
Well, Sim, my random question for you is this, and it's a very simple question. Would you rather have sausages for fingers or gherkins for toes?
Oh, that's very important.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a good question. I think gherkins for toes, because you can at least wear shoes.
Cover them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no one likes feet anyway. So would it really matter if they were gherkins or just feet?
Yes.
There we go. And if I had sausage for fingers, I'd probably eat them.
Yeah. Oh, uncooked. Oh no.
Well, you know, if you get burnt fingers. I mean, sometimes I have sausage fingers when I do my, texting my children. I can't get the letters right.
Yes.
So the sausage fingers is quite real. But gherkins for feet. If that's okay, I'll choose that one, Simon.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
all right. I was thinking with sausage. If you had a pet dog and you had sausages for fingers, that'd be quite tricky.
Be a nightmare.
Be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
But also, if you had gherkins for toes, I mean, they'd be sniffing around your toes.
You sniff around your toes, I suppose.
You'd have to buy a completely new shoe wardrobe, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
'Cause
waterproof ones.
Yeah.
But when they dry out.
Oh.
Dried out gherkins.
Ugh.
Oh.
I guess if you went for a pedicure, you'd have to just go and dip them in vinegar, wouldn't you?
That was-
I feel like I'm in a surreal universe. I mean, seriously?
I think you are.
You are. No, that's okay. Now I think we've got the answer.
So what do we think? Gherkins for
Gherkins
toes.
for toes.
I think
Okay.
that's a sensible
good
choice,
answer,
'cause
good answer.
you can cover it up, unless you're wearing sandals, of course. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to avoid that
Yeah.
now with your
Okay.
new gherkin toes. But well, Simon, we have very low expectations of this part of the show, and you never fail to meet them.
I think I did on that occasion. Yeah.
But in any case, that was
Simon's Random Question.
well, Sim. I'm sad to say, although you may not be sad to hear, that we've reached the end of the show. Your contribution, at least, has been splendid. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on this show. Sorry, I'm going to fall back laughing at this point. This is great. I've loved the experience. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Simon, for having me on your show.
And dear listeners, thank you for being with us. Don't forget, you can keep up with all the Take A Pew podcast news by following us on Twinsterbook and subscribing on your favourite podcast platform. We'll have another great episode ready to delight your ears before you know it, and probably before you want it. But just for now, it's Toodle Pip from me.
And tatty bye from me.
Join us again next time as we take a pew.
Take a pew.